10 years ago, the city of Chicago made a plan. Towering high-rises would be demolished, reversing squalid conditions that had stood for decades. New neighborhoods would spring up in their place, reconnecting communities that had languished in isolation with the wider city. But the plan didn't stop at bricks and mortar.
Under the plan for transformation, we're really working hard to reconnect communities, rebuild the self-esteem of people who live in those communities. And we're going to use a strategy that talks about more than just bricks and mortar.
It actually presented the city with the opportunity of a generation to offer thousands and thousands of residents an opportunity that they might grasp to change their lives for the better.
It's transformative with respect to the way they view their roles in the city of Chicago, in the state of Illinois, in this country.
This is an effort to rebuild people's lives. They didn't want to live in the projects, they call them, anymore. They wanted their independence. They wanted to get on with their lives. So I knew in the 90s that if I drive down State Street and look on one side of the block, that life can be better on the other side. And that's why I knew we had to take it on.
The city of Chicago's plan for transformation marks the most ambitious redevelopment of public housing ever attempted. Scores of blighted buildings have been demolished, and 25,000 units are being renovated or newly constructed. Residents have found new opportunities to improve the quality of life for themselves and their families. And surrounding communities that stood in the shadow of public housing for a half a century are being revitalized through new investment. But this is not a time for celebration alone. At the inception of the plan in 1999, many considered public housing in Chicago to be a disaster. While much has been accomplished, the plan is a continual work in progress. Many strategies have met success. Others did not meet the high expectations set. But all offer opportunities to reflect on lessons learned. Chicago's earliest public housing was built during the Great Depression to replace crowded, dank tenements. In the 30s and 40s, developments were often racially and economically integrated, consisting of townhouses or small apartment buildings. After World War II and into the 50s, as new housing needs emerged, Congress accelerated the growth of public housing, mandating construction of more than 800,000 units nationwide. While the intentions were good, federal standards that demanded the lowest possible cost per unit meant the creation of massive high-rises, at times over the objections of local residents and leaders.
High-rises where you have large numbers of children simply don't work. Even the original Mayor Daley argued against building high-rises.
At the same time the high-rises were going up, resources for maintenance were declining due to well-intentioned but ultimately problematic federal rulemaking. Some rules prohibited unmarried men from living with their families, limiting family income in an era when men were the primary breadwinners.
Back in those days, if your dad made a lot of money, he wasn't able to hang around if your mom was on public aid.
Other rules imposed limits on household income, pushing working families out. The 1971 Brooke Amendment imposed a rent cap of 25% on household income, creating a financial burden that led to chronic budget shortfalls and a lack of funds for repairs or improvements. The isolation of the high-rise buildings was unfortunately matched by an increasing deterioration of surrounding neighborhoods, with long, vibrant communities devastated by disinvestment in the wake of the unrest of 1968.
Just went down, you know, but it went down slow. It didn't just all overnight, you know, it just went down slow. And you wouldn't notice it going down until it's already down, you know.
And a lot of the working families started to move out of public housing, and I think that also is a time that you started to see more of the drugs, more of the gangs, a lot of the violence that started to dominate public housing developments at that time.
Resistance to the increased isolation began as early as the mid-1960s, when a civil rights case was filed on behalf of CHA resident and community activist Dorothy Gautreaux, who challenged the building of public housing exclusively in African American communities.
This is the heyday, if you will, of the civil rights era. And if you couldn't segregate in schools, why could you do it in housing?
While Gautreaux won the case, it was not until 1987, when the Habitat Company was appointed by the federal courts to implement the decision, that scattered site housing was built in the broader community.
So as receiver, we did the physical planning, working with the community, with the aldermen, with the CHA, other interested parties, certainly community residents, and making the housing happen.
From 1987 through the late 1990s, approximately 2,000 scattered site units were built in racially diverse areas throughout the city, with equal portions of each development reserved for CHA families and for income-eligible neighborhood residents. Scattered site development strengthened these neighborhoods and often signaled the beginning of reinvestment. At the same time, the physical and social conditions in Chicago's traditional public housing developments continued to worsen.